Right, today we're going to talk about lesson 9-5, the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula helps us find our zeros, or the place where it crosses the x-axis or x-intercepts. That's the same thing. X-intercepts and zeros are the same thing. What a lot of things students forget to do, and this is why I put it very important right at the beginning. The equation must be in standard form, and it must be equal to 0. So standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are some number, some real number, okay? And it has to be equal to 0. If it doesn't say this equal to 0, what you have to do is get it that way in order to find your a, b, and c. You cannot find your a, b, and c unless it's in this form. So moving along, the big idea. If an equation can be put into this form, ax squared plus bx plus c, it can be solved using your quadratic formula. Down below, the equation 0 equals, notice 0 equals, a negative 4.9t squared plus 4.3t plus 10 is an example of a quadratic equation. Okay? Notice instead of x's they use t's. Kind of look like a problem that we looked at yesterday, correct? A quadratic equation is an equation that can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, where a cannot equal 0. If a was 0, then all we would have is a linear equation. Okay? That's why a cannot be 0. In this case, t is being used in place of x. A is the number in front of our x squared, which is a negative 4.9. Notice you don't include the variable. B is the number that's in front of our linear function, which is 4.3. And C is our constant, which is, in this case, 10. Okay? Everybody realize how you get those numbers A, B, and C. The quadratic formula. If it is written in this form, then you can find A, B, and C. Then to find your solutions, you're going to use this formula. This formula is x equals, it says x equals because what you are finding are x-intercepts. A negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. You're going to want to pause and make sure that you write down this formula. The quadratic formula is one of the most often used and most famous formulas in all mathematics. You need to memorize it today. You are going to have to know that formula. So let's look at example 1. Solve x squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 0. First thing you got to ask yourself, is it in standard form? Yes. Since it's in standard form, I can go ahead and find my a, find my b, and find my c. My a is the number that's in front of the x squared. Well, it's not 0. In this case, it is the number 1. So a is 1. B is the number that's in front of the x. The number in front of the x is 8. It has a positive sign, so it's a positive 8. C is our constant, which in this case is 7. Now that I found my A, B, and C, I plug it into my quadratic formula. B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay? So, now it's just a matter of plugging these numbers in, doing my math step by step, slowly, to get my answer. Do not type this all in your calculator at once. You're going to do something wrong and it's not going to follow the order of operations. So watch how I do this. So a negative b, what's b? B is 8. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's 8 squared. Minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 7. Okay? Divided by 2 times a, which is 1. I got to do what's under my radical first. Okay? So x equals, a negative times 8 is a negative 8, plus or minus, and 8 squared is 64, minus, because a negative times a positive is a negative. 4 times 1 times 7 is 28. Divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Now this looks like it's going to be an easy one. We don't actually need our calculators to do any math or find a square root. So we're going to say equals, everybody should know 64 minus 28. I'm still doing the math underneath the radical sign. 64 minus 28 is 36. What I have to do is I got to get rid of this radical. Everybody should be yelling at me. The square root of 36 is 6. Okay? All divided by 2. Now, this is where I get my two solutions. My first solution is a negative 8 plus 6 divided by 2. Or my second answer is a negative 8 minus 6 divided by 2. Which is going to equal a negative 8 plus 6 is a negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1. Or a negative 8 minus 6 is a negative 14 divided by 2 is a negative 7. So if I were to graph this quadratic equation, what's going to happen is I'm going to have a parabola where it goes through a negative 1 and it goes through a negative 7, and I know it's positive, so it goes up. So my parabola is going to look something like this, kind of ugly, but it definitely goes through those 2 points. Okay? What I want you to do is find those 2 answers, and that's what the quadratic formula helps us do. Moving on. Looks like a problem that we had yesterday. In the 10-meter platform diving, the function h of t is equal to a negative 4.9 t squared plus 4.3 t plus 10. Gives the approximate height above the water in meters a diver is at t seconds after launching into the dive. How many seconds elapse from the time the diver leaves the 10-meter platform until the diver hits the water? Well, here's what we got. We got a guy that starts at 10 meters, okay? And what happens is he jumps, so he goes a little bit higher than 10 meters, and then eventually, right before he hits the water, they want to know that time. And that time is t. And that's what we are looking for. How long it takes for him to hit the water. Now, we are still going to get 2 answers. Notice we have a parabola. The only difference is one of them is going to be negative, which we don't want. The other one is going to be positive, which is what we want. So I set this equal to 0 because 0 is the point right before it hits the water. So A in this case is going to be a negative 4.9. B in this case is going to be 4.3. And C in this case is going to be my 10. So put it into my formula. X equals a negative B. What's B? 4.3. Plus or minus the square root of B squared. 4.3 squared. Minus 4 times A is a negative 4.9 times C, which is 10. Divided by 2 times A, which is a negative 4.9. Okay? Once again, do what's inside the radical sign first. So X equals a negative times 4.3 is a negative 4.3 plus or minus the radical 4.3 squared. I'm going to go to my calculator. 4.3 squared gives me 18.49. I got a negative times a positive gives me a positive. 4 times 10 is 40, so I'm going to take 40 times 4.9. Gives me 196. Divided by 2 times a negative 4.9, we all should know is a negative 9.8. Okay? Going on, moving on. A negative 4.3 plus or minus. Now, that's going to be the square root of 18.49 plus 196. Probably could have done this in our heads. Gives me 214.49. I'm going to write that up here. Oh, sorry. 214.49. Just adding on another step. Negative 4.3 plus or minus. If I take the square root of that, and I'm just going to type square root of my answer that I have up here, because that's what I want, I get 14.65 I'm going to use. 14.65 divided by a negative 9.8. So here are my two answers. Okay? I get a negative 4.3 plus 14.65 divided by a negative 9.8. Or I get a negative 4.3 minus 14.65 divided by a negative 9.8. And that's going to give me my two solutions. So I'm going to do this on the calculator. Negative 4.3 plus 14.65. Notice I don't just hit the division sign and then type that in, because then it's not going to take both of them. So I want to find that numerator first, so I hit equals. Then I'm going to hit divide a negative 9.8. And gives me a negative 1.05. A negative 1.05. So that's actually the one that we don't want because it's negative. So I'm going to do this one, negative 4.3. Same process. Subtract 14.65. I got to hit enter first because I want that whole number divided by a negative 9.8. Divided by a negative 9.8. Sorry. gives me 1.93, and these are seconds. T is seconds, if you remember. So, how long did it take him from being up 10 meters to hit right before he hit the water? Well, it took 1.93 seconds. All right, let's take a look at the example 3. Solve x squared minus 3x is equal to 37. Now remember, the first thing you got to ask yourself, is it in standard form? Is it in ax squared plus bx plus c form equals 0? No, it actually says equals 37. So what I got to do is I got to get 37 over to the other side. And we can do that by using our inverse operations. The inverse of adding 37 is subtracting 37. So this equation is going to become x squared minus 3x minus 37 is equal to 0. Now you're just going to find out what your a, b, and c is. A is what's in front of your x squared. It's 1. B is what's in front of your x, which is a negative 3. And c is your constant, which is a negative 37. Go ahead and put this into your formula. X equals a negative b. B is a negative 3. Notice I had to take that sign. This was a negative 3, so I had to put a negative on it. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 3 squared. Minus 4 times a is 1 times c is a negative 37. All divided by 2 times 1. Do my steps. A negative times a negative is a positive 3. Plus or minus. Negative 3 squared is 9. And a negative times a negative is a positive. And 4 times 37. I'm going to do that real quick right up here. 37 times 4, 28. And 12, 148. All divided by 2. 9 plus 148, you're going to say is 157. I need to find the square root of 157. So I'm going to go to my calculator. Square root 157 equals 12.53. So this is going to equal 3 plus or minus 12.53 divided by 2. So my two answers are 3 plus 12.53 divided by 2, or 3 minus 12.53 divided by 2. Well, 3 plus 12.53, we all know is 15.53, right? You divide that by 2, you get 7.77, or 3 minus 12.53, we all know that is 9.53, divided by 2, and it gives you 4.765. And those are your two answers to your problem. So this parabola up here is going to go through 4.7 and 7.7, and it's going up. So you're going to have a parabola that's going to look something like this, probably a lot better looking. But if you go to your calculator and you type in this function into your calculator, okay, you're going to see pretty close to the same exact graph. That's all I have for you today. Until tomorrow, we'll see you later.